Leigh, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's awesome to be here.
We're very happy to have you. First off, why don't you tell me a little bit about your company, Eight?
Sure. So, Eight, we're a pure play product company. We work within the Shopify ecosystem, been in it for just over a decade at this point, working primarily in themes and apps. We're not directly on the merchant side, but we're very focused on the digital products within the theme side and then SaaS within the apps
Mhm.
ecosystem.
No, that's awesome. Very succinct. As far as your position as the CTO, what are your specific responsibilities at the company?
I mean, we're a relatively small, tight-knit, and agile company, so
Mhm.
my responsibilities do vary quite drastically. But it's mostly anything within the technical proviso of it. So our development cycles, working with our development teams, making final calls on anything that's sort of structural or strategic, and then everything into our infrastructure and scaling, servers, server infrastructure, DevOps, and then policy level stuff, cyber and sec side as well.
Policy stuff too. Cool. So Eight essentially bills itself as a company that builds and develops products for global merchants with an emphasis on Shopify. I think that's like the exact
Yep.
verbatim that I found. And honestly, while I think it's kind of cool, when I go to like weare8.com, it's kind of cryptic and it's kind of like branded and it's clean and I, I don't mean that to denigrate in any way,
Yeah.
but I think there's a clear objective to be sleek, and I like the word that you used, and that's agile.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, off the bat, what the idea there is that kind of intentional to be mysterious? You got to hit us up to find out what we do, type of thing, or how did you develop kind of that brand identity a little bit?
I think it's multi-pronged in this case. Number one, it's anybody that works within sort of digital may not have time to actually get their website fully dialed out or have all of the marketing and material in and on it. We're all busy. We're all slamming stuff in the background to get things done. So I think that's
Mm-hmm.
one aspect of it. But Eight historically has been quite a sort of transparent company. We're not front and center. We're not dealing with merchants. We're not trying to get our branding into people's faces. The themes are designed that somebody puts their brand on top of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and the company started as a theme company originally, long before my time. And yes, we work in apps, but I think there is that layer of transparency and a little bit of mysteriousness around it, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of our thought process of not saying too much. But if somebody reaches out and we're discussing something with them, then we can tell them who we are, what we do, and where we've been.
That's cool. And that's very transparent answer. It's like show don't tell is kind of
Pretty
what I
much.
hear you say is what's important.
Yeah.
What are some of the specific products that Eight develops? You mentioned software,
Mhm.
themes. What else are we talking about specifically?
So we fall specifically into two categories within the Shopify ecosystem, and it's not just that we're aligned with it; we're all in on it.
Mm-hmm.
So themes is obviously a Shopify theme interface to get somebody up and running as quickly as possible. That sold through the Shopify theme store. We've got 6 on there that range the whole way back to like 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think
It's great.
Envy was the first one. Those are very much a single purchase. It's a starting point for a new merchant, somebody that's getting up and going. Premium themes within the theme ecosystem really give you more features than a basic one. But they also give you lifetime support, which a lot of people don't really like talk about. So we've
Mm-hmm.
got that aspect of it. It's both building a product that scales for all users, unlike agency type work where you're really focusing on one person's specific needs. So themes are very complex from that standpoint and take a fair amount of overhead, and then
Mm-hmm.
obviously the support side of maintaining good support for merchants as they grow and as they extend beyond it. Um, and then on the software side, the sort of flagship app within the company is Bundle Builder, which is a custom bundling or pick and mix focused app. So we're not talking about your quick upsell. These three products are sold quickly together. And this is much more of the choose what you want, add a whole bunch of layers around discounting or specific conditions. You have to have one of these. You don't have to have one of those, or the conditional aspects of it. And that app is, it's about just under 6 years old. I think it was 6 years old at this point. Been in the ecosystem for all of that time. It is a bit of a behemoth because Shopify is obviously starting to catch up with a lot of the sort of the new APIs that have come out over the years. But we really went out there to target and focus on niches with that, which is it's a relatively complex beast in the background as far as server infrastructure. Just stock syncing, for instance, infrastructure that goes into Black Friday. We do over 59 million odd webhooks, so requests coming inbound on the servers on that day.
I believe it. On one day.
On one day, So you're dealing with a lot of the stuff which people don't think about when they're talking about like an app. This app's just, I just install it and it does this thing, but actually it's all in the background. So that's our sort of software engineering side. Is both into how that happens and then also the infrastructure and stability for merchants to be successful. So we fall into those two categories primarily. So it's just themes and then apps. We don't really bridge into the sort of expert or agency space at all. We work relatively transparent behind both DTC, so direct to the merchants, or through agencies.
And I think you mentioned something that is extremely valuable. And I talk with a lot of agencies. I talk with a lot of software companies. And you mentioned that what's different is an agency has to cater to one person specifically. But when you're developing a theme or, bundle builder, you're trying to develop the stuff that is all encompassing, that is easy to use. And what I kind of hear you say, Leigh, is anticipate problems that will arise. You can't just go straight to one client who's got this one problem. You need to try to anticipate what tens of thousands minimum people are going to
100%
have problems with. How do you do that?
I mean, it's so complex. Obviously, I come from sort of agency space behind a lot of this. So, I've worked with a lot of the merchants. I've had that request of, can't you just? And at an agency level, you just focus on that specific goal and getting it out the door. And sometimes that comes with you going back to the merchant and saying, hey, we can get to that goal exactly. It is going to leave this gap, but ultimately I can get you to what you need to be. I think one of the things that was quite surprising to me when I stepped into the theme side and looking at the complexity of it was just how much overhead goes into thinking about those 10,000 users. Because that one feature that is not just this is the specific goal, it's like this is the overarching goal, and we're going to get you close to it. If you really wanted to do exactly what you wanted would probably break all of these other merchants next to you.
And not to cut you off, but it's very normal for a solution to bring another problem.
100%. Yeah, it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Yeah.
And when I entered into this space, I almost came from sort of custom theme builds and hundreds of them, and suddenly went, do you know what? Building a theme that's going to go out as a product is probably 10 times harder than working with the most difficult merchant I've ever worked with.
Oh, wow.
Because you do have to take every single aspect into account. You're not dealing with a small marketing team that you can train one-on-one. You're dealing with, really thinking about the UX of what should we be putting here? How much control should we be doing? Where should that where should that control be? And then what support debt will that generate? What's going to break? What somebody may set something or configure something that actually is detrimental to their business. We have to think through all of those different layers. And I think that was a very, very stark contrast, which I always thought themes are a theme because I've built hundreds of them. But the moment you get down to the nuts and bolts of this actually has to go as a product, there's all of those aspects and all of those layers that suddenly become really front and center on it.
And the way people use it can be very unique and individualistic. And the way that you mentioned your envy theme, to do something specifically for me and my business would be very different than what you could. So trying to anticipate every version of every hypothetical has got to be, kind of taxing and all for not all for naught, but you're only going to get closer and closer, but probably never get perfect, because that's why people have customer support teams and the like. So I'm interested in, do you do some like different testings for these themes and kind of put them out in the world before you start selling them, so people can, run with it and be like, oh, well, I wanted it to do this and it can't?
I mean, we obviously take in feedback, and we do a lot of the support layer stuff, which is reactive. We've been moving towards more of a proactive approach, where we are actually doing reach out, speaking to people, looking at folks that are within it. One of the limitations to that is the Shopify sort of theme ecosystem is that you have to sell through the Shopify store. Mm-hmm. So the only feedback that we could really get that's before somebody purchases it is if they've got it on a trial directly through the Shopify store. Mm-hmm. And, so we are moving to more and more of those approaches and getting a bit creative around them. But a lot of the time, it's actually just thrashing it from a QA standpoint, putting it into the hands of individuals on our teams who haven't built a store, and then going, how do you build a store? And sort of refining through that process. It is relatively closed in, and we're trying to look at creative ways to expand that out into more.
That's cool. I mean, you can kind of guarantee you're getting honest feedback too. If it's, I feel like you're more likely to get honest feedback internally sometimes. So moving on to the general product development process, especially for something like, Bundle Builder, what does that look like? What does that development process for these products that you work on looks like?
So obviously, I mean, there's a massive difference between themes and apps there.
Sure.
Just completely polar. Within sort of apps, a new build app is a different process altogether to something that's got thousands of users that are using it daily. So within our case here, our general development process starts with discussions. So, and it will normally be feature level. I'm going to talk feature level rather than new build. I'll go back to new builds at the end because that's a different structure altogether. But feature level, we'll go into a discussion standpoint, which goes out early to the entire team. We try and get as much 360-degree input on everything. So, hey, we need to change something surrounding what data we store, or we need to change something that's going to change the display for everyone. Where's this going to be an issue? We want the input from our support team going, we're going to get support queries for that. We're going to be dealing with this. How are we going to mitigate it? What's the reason for it? And then we might have something coming in from the technical side of going, have we thought about X, Y, and Z? So it generally starts off at a discussion standpoint, then gets distilled down into an issue or a ticket within our system and within our team, which is generally the high-level acceptance criteria of what we're achieving and any of the caveats that we have out of that discussion. So we'll take and distill all of that information down into a specific specification. And then from there, it's into sort of requirements. We do sort of complexity mapping within the actual dev teams, within our UX teams, looking at what's going to be going in, what are the changes, where are they getting into, and then through a dev cycle after that. So, and that dev cycle might touch on core code, backend code, admin app. Obviously, with Shopify apps, you got sort of three primary components. No matter how you build it, basically you have a back end that's going to be doing all the authenticated stuff, and then your admin app, which is the one which the merchants are going to interact with, and then if you happen to have something which is touching storefronts, a storefront app of some form, shape, or variety, or a storefront render. So we will generally split that up across our team based off that core spec, and then work that through into a release cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like dev of a brand new app from the ground up, it's choosing stack, it's choosing, what infrastructure you're using, what are the infrastructure sort of requirements that you're going to need in time as it scales, and then making all of those decisions early on. The vast majority of the first stages of an app build is identical, no matter who's building it. It's just choose a stack, get started, get it authenticating, and then it's down to feature level, which we've talked about. So that's our general cycle.
And that's great, man. That's extremely specific, and your role is to be that decisive one. I mean, I know if it's like most corporate structures, the CEO has like final cut or really the final decision, but more often than not, they're just going to delegate to what your decision is because you're the expert in the technology sphere or technology sphere. What's that look like? I mean, are you usually? Yeah, please.
Like we bounce ideas around. So Spence is CEO, me is CTO, and then COO is Lindsay Morgan. And between, when it comes down to technical, Spence is sort of a front end developer. Originally, he built the first themes. So there's obviously a love on that standpoint. When it comes down to technical, we try to use as much knowledge as we have across the team. I don't know everything. I have people on my team that are much better than me in specific areas, and that's why they're there, and we trust them.
That's cool.
So I think as far as it goes, we'll often have the devil's advocate things of, should we go to that complexity level? Should we really push it that far and do 6 weeks, or should we get it out, see what works, and then move forward from that? But we do just have that as a discussion and as an open approach across the company in general. That's how that looks. In general, really from both my side is more on the decisive of, actually, this is what needs to be decided and this is what we're going to do. And then on the sort of polar side is both myself and Spence should really be filtering in ideas into the product flow of, here's an idea or here's something that could be a goal that may make sense for us. And then sort of leaving it to our product management team, and then finally project and distillation into dev in the long run.
That's great. It sounds extremely collaborative. So in terms of the 8 themes, just to kind of circle back there, the design is to enhance performance, and that's kind of how they're marketed is these themes will enhance performance and get you better results and get you more and better product sales revenue. In terms of the technical specifications, what are those that elevate the themes and garner results much more impressively than other ones?
I mean, it's an interesting point, because performance in e-commerce, whenever you speak to a developer, they're thinking straight performance. How fast is it? How quick is it going to get on your plate? And
what'll prevent you from calling customer support of, the theme
exactly right
as little as not often as possible.
And I think, when we sort of look at themes or as interfaces as a whole, you've got a balance between functionality and performance and expected UX. And I'm saying expected UX because I think that that's something which a lot of people kind of gloss over, is that there's an expectation based on what somebody's done in their past. What websites have they interacted with? How did they find the product sets? There's that expectation or a common pattern where you're not putting somebody on the back foot trying to find a product. And that kind of goes in as big performance aspects. If you're talking in pure e-commerce performance, that's getting somebody to the product, getting it into their cart and getting it out the door. From a technical standpoint, you've then got the layer below that, is how quick is that? Where are the roadblocks? How fast is that page loading? How quick are those images in front of somebody? That's 7 seconds. Somebody's decided whether they're doing something or not on the site. And Amazon probably with their sort of major push for page speed makes the biggest difference, or Google's push for page speed makes the biggest difference, brings 2 aspects into direct conflict, and that's how much content do you have on a page and how fast you want it. And I think that's a decision which a lot of merchants really need to make, is like, do I want that extra image? Yes, that extra image is critical, or not. We can
Mm-hmm.
optimize for weeks on code and code standards, but one extra video or one extra image on that page is going to slow it down more than an optimization.
Mm-hmm.
So we focus on getting everything as light as possible from a performance standpoint. We focus on the UX, the expected UX, and the flows that make sense from a sort of general industry standard, and what's sort of coming in from conversion rate optimization experts, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But then it does finally come down to the merchant pushing that performance forward, and then deciding where their performance should best be. Is it just about page speed, or is it about something else, telling the story,
Mm-hmm.
engaging people?
Yeah, that's great. And what I'm hearing you say, Leigh, is you got to kind of pick and choose your battles. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
your
always.
responsibility is to the people who buy and use your themes. And even then, you don't want to make all the decisions for them. You want to
We just want to give them
get
options.
yeah, you want to give them the options, of course, and you also want to make it easier for their users to get products as quickly as possible, but you don't always want to like make that story for them, just the tools to just the vocabulary to make that story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm much like Shopify themselves. We're just empowering entrepreneurs.
Sure.
We're not telling their story for them. Otherwise, everything would be cookie cutted, right?
Oh,
We
that'd be
want
so
somebody to,
boring.
yeah, it would be so boring. We want somebody to push it off the left corner of the screen and go, wow, we never even thought you could do that.
Yeah.
That's what we really. I mean, that always excites me whenever I see an interface of a site where I'm like, oh, that's cool. They pushed that out and they did something there, or they, whatever it is. Everyone tells their story and puts it front and center in different ways, and I think that's amazing.
Absolutely. So you've worked with a pretty prestigious companies, at least when I looked at Build or Bundle Builder. Have you been able to make the software prestigious enough for Bundle Builder to gain the attention of like Nintendo and Utz? I mean, those are companies that being in America, are Utz
Yeah.
specifically, quite familiar with. I see both of those everywhere, and I'm probably not alone in that, just because I'm in America. So how did that your stature get the attention of companies that large?
I think Bundle Builder, and it's worth going back into sort of a bit of the spool up and understanding a bit of the Shopify ecosystem. Is Bundle Builder
Please.
filled a need? For many years, when the Shopify app ecosystem sort of first started, it was all about filling gaps within what Shopify wasn't covering,
Mm-hmm.
and that you know gets people to search for who we are, what we do. Bundle Builder specifically really caters to, and its key selling points. And somebody is probably going to shout at me about this one, but its key selling points is really the control that it gives you from a merchant standpoint in terms of the conditions. So what
Mm-hmm.
products can be sold together, and how many does somebody have to purchase them with, and then the discounts that you can apply based on those conditions. That to me is one of the key selling points, which Bundle Builder hit really early on, and that opens the doors for the likes of Nintendo to then do, hey, we're going to do this Switch plus this plus that, and they can then optimize it to, hey, yeah, we've got enough profit in there to give those discounts.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have enough profit in that space to push around it, and it, Bundle Builder really just fell into that gap, and yeah, we're stable. Our app infrastructure is substantially stable. As I said, we hit really peak times, and our servers don't really even feel it. We've pre-planned for it. Our team is sitting in the background going, hey, we're coming up to peak. Let's 10x our databases. We're not an app that's going to wait until the database goes down and then switch it. We're thinking of that. And I think when you mix all of that, a great fitting into a niche, fitting into specific key usages that somebody's looking for, and then backing it up with the stability, with the support across the board is the key.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. That's beautiful. I think that's really elegantly said. Um, I was told ahead of the show that the company Aid has recently gone async internally.
Yep.
First off, do you mind educating me a little bit on what that means?
Sure. I mean, I hadn't heard it called async, and I worked in a very similar environment in a long time ago. But it's become a bit of an industry term now, which
Hmm.
is, we all know what remote is. I think COVID pushed everyone into remote working, which is amazing. But there's one aspect beyond that where standard remote work, you still work a 9 to 5, you're still expected to be at your desk, you're expected to be available for meetings, you're expected to be available for emergency calls or teams or whatever you're working on. And async fundamentally changes, or is a shift, an expectation shift within the business, where it's all about the results.
Hmm.
And there's flexibility that becomes with those results. So instead of expecting somebody to be at their desk, we're expecting them to fulfill what they said they're going to fulfill within a specific time zone. And the flexibility to get there is completely on them. So if somebody doesn't want to be at their desk from 9 to 5, that's fine. If you prefer working at 3 a.m., which that's kind of my vibe, I'm normally the
Me too,
3
man.
a.m. 3 a.m. person, right?
Yeah.
There's no expectation that I need to be in early.
Hmm.
Or if I'm going to travel to the States or Canada or something like that, it's pack a bag and go. Because as long as you're fulfilling the results that we as a company, and that's all of us in the company, believe in, um, that becomes the focus. I manage my own time. I become a manager of myself. And that is a change that we made across the company. So we've always been remote. We just took it to that next level, where it is then, the flexibility is there. There's no expectation of even being in a meeting or paying
Hmm.
attention in the meeting. Everything's documented, and we focus on getting things out the door and people taking their responsibility forward. So async as a whole, and the way I view it, and I'm sure there's multiple viewpoints on this because it is being touted all over the show in different mindsets, but to me, it's fundamentally remote, but
Hmm.
then taking out the time constraints within a day and focusing those time constraints on generating results as a team, owning those results as a team, and doing it in whichever way you're most efficient.
I'll be
Whether that
honest,
is
man.
working at 3 a.m.
I'll be honest. I've been working async at Debutify for 6, 7 months now, and I didn't know there was a word for it, and
Yeah,
I appreciate it and think it's really cool. I mean, what you're literally describing is how we operate for full transparency.
I
Um,
think I think I think there are lots of companies that have worked in this space.
yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I've worked in a number of companies that work in this space.
Hmm.
Um, and I used to run a sort of international team where we used to just hand off work from one person to the next as we crossed out of time zones. And it was
Hmm.
awesome. It always just worked. And I think uh, I don't really know where the async term came from. I know there are a couple of really big entities that have pushed the terminology. I think GitLab is one of them,
Hmm.
and there are a number of other ones. But yeah, that term of async and results driven is
Hmm.
has become something front and center. So
No,
yeah.
that's great, and I'm glad you're a proponent of it because I really enjoy it.
Oh
I'm a
yeah.
big proponent of it too, and it just gives people the freedom of autonomy a lot more, and that is extremely confidence boosting. And when you give people certain parameters of like just get the work done, they create their own environment. Sometimes I'll go to the library and work because I can't focus here. There are too many distractions sometimes. But, Leigh, you also mentioned something that I find really valuable, and that's I am not like a normal work conditioner. I get probably most of my work done between maybe 12 and 4 a.m., if I'm
Yeah,
being honest.
exactly right.
The only scheduled things I have are these interviews, and that keeps me disciplined of all right, I got to make sure that I'm here at this time and so
Mm.
on, but I also have to be prepared for it. And I don't know, the async mentality definitely works for me. And I'm glad that you're a proponent of it because I enjoy it as well. Do you see it as becoming the new normal moving forward?
You know, it, I don't know if it will be the new normal. I think there are many industries, you just crossed onto it, where you were talking about there's something that's at a fixed time. So I have to be there for that. I have to be prepared. If you think of
Sure.
sales, customer services, etc., there's a lot of those industries where it becomes much more challenging,
Hmm.
because there is an expectation of somebody being synchronous with you when you're working in it, in that space. I also don't think that async is is perfect for everyone. There
Hmm.
are some people that really struggle with it. They struggle with the freedom, with planning stuff around it. And um, I I know sort of some folks that really struggle with getting a task list or focusing on what actually matters within their day, and they can wind up sort of burning themselves out quite quickly within an async environment. So
Hmm.
having sort of watched that, I think there's a balance factor. I don't think it will be the new norm, but I do think that there will be a lot of companies that will adapt either entirely or to some degree a lot of the sort of aspects of it.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's definitely challenges around it. There's challenges in where it is. Obviously, there's sync elements to every week, um, or every 2 weeks, or whatever it is that somebody's working on. But
Sure.
yeah, that's my view. Anyway,
Do,
I don't think it's going to be everywhere. I think it will be in some places.
do you think globalization is kind of like a requirement for it? I mean, frankly, that this is an international company and it makes the most sense, but I don't I struggle with believing if, I'm in Virginia, if I had a local job here, based here, if it's even really as necessary. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, yeah, probably, yeah, nearly a decade ago, it was the first time that I was really exposed and jumped directly
Hmm.
into sort of a full blown remote company, which was very close. It was all results driven,
Hmm.
slightly different focus because it was all based on sort of hours and billable hours. But um, what was interesting there and in that environment is that the way that I hired, or the way that I considered who we were placing into the team, was the best fit for that, no matter where they were.
Hmm.
And I think that in some ways that starts to open up a lot of doors. I think, sure, there's the stuff that, the camaraderie within a company as it grows, being able to see somebody, being able to
Morale.
interact,
Hmm.
have a coffee, go for a barbecue, lunch, or whatever it is, that makes a massive difference, and that can be great for the sort of mental health within a team. But in
Hmm.
the same breath, if you are full global, async makes perfect sense.
Hmm.
And it also allows companies to then choose and work with the best talent that's out there
Hmm.
and say, hey, we need you. You're amazing. Let's get, doesn't matter when you work. If you work at 2 a.m., that's cool.
Hmm. And that
Um,
I think that can be invaluable. You have one of the longest histories in this same field of development, engineering,
yeah.
programming. Um, you have the longest history, one of, in the same field among all the guests that I've had on the show. I know
I
there's
mean,
some
I
that
have
have
somebody on my team who has more experience than me, so that's amazing as well.
that's awesome. I mean, it even goes back. We were joking about the show. It even goes back to getting a job right out of college as a Flash programmer back in
Yeah,
1999, and a lot of engineer.
Macromedia before Adobe bought it.
Yeah, and a lot of engineers and software people probably get a chuckle out of that because that feels on brand. But my question, Leigh, is what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in your 24 years of experience in this industry? And follow up, what do you project as being the biggest change going forward?
Just, I mean, anything within this space, because when I started out, it wasn't building for the web. The web was
Uh-huh.
my little hobby. It was mirc chat rooms and aim and pirated content and all the rest of that in the very early exploration days. But web was almost hobbyist, just like, oh, you have to
Hmm.
have a website, yeah, whatever, that's going to happen in time. So a lot of it was true engineering in the early years, and then all of a sudden the web exploded. And we saw all the technology sort of, come to the forefront and start evolving, whether it was, the .NET and then into the PHP days, which I was massive into, early days of open source stuff, of democratizing content, was a major change. It changed everything from these sort of enterprise systems into open source democratized platforms for the web to be built on. At that point, I really did step away from a lot of the integrated engineering stuff where it was all about hardware and it was all about what you could control with tools around it. And I've lived through a couple of those changes where it went from very much the licensed products to open source products, self-hosted open source products, infrastructure, to the sort of rise of cloud and SaaS offerings.
Sure.
Which have all been major evolutions within the ecosystem. One of the big ones for me, I'm a big supporter of the JavaScript ecosystem. I've been sort of involved in the Node ecosystem and React ecosystem from the early days. But that was a major pivot because I almost ditched everything I knew beforehand, whether it was, CNET and PHP and all, even Java. Fuck Java. And basically that was a major change, and I think that really was a big hit. I was sort of think back to like 2012 2013ish, major change in what people were building, how interactive websites were. Suddenly this rise of web apps that felt reactive, that felt like there was something to it, and they're just the norm for us now. We don't even think about what they are, and I think that was a major paradigm shift. Probably at this point, I think it's been riding a lot of that just into the SaaS space, into the cloud ecosystem, and the democratization of what you can do as quickly as you can do it. Payment infrastructure opened a lot of that up. Early days, it was a pain for us to get black box authorization into banks to do credit card payments and all the rest of it. Now you don't even think about it. It's just you sign into service and off you go. To sort of answer the second part of that, of where do I see this all going, I personally believe that we're at a major watershed within what we do as a whole, and that's probably going to be driven by AI. At this stage. I'm a massive fan of a lot of the tooling that's coming out, a lot of the areas that people are being pushed into. Obviously, I have the concerns, I have the security concerns, I have the authenticity, all the rest of it of data. But the way I view it now is that this ecosystem and how we do things is going to change drastically and much faster than we think it would. I'm not talking 5 years. I think it's going to take less than that, of just, fundamental shifts, whether it's e-commerce, whether it's the expected interfaces. And I threw a line out at a sort of speaking event a little while ago, which is, is the future of e-commerce an online store, or is it a conversation? And in the back of my mind, I sort of said it flippantly, but it's reflected on me a number of times, because I really do view the expectation that we're heading into at this point is just so drastically different to what we've done in the past and potentially what it could get to. So in my mind, as far as engineering and sort of dev going forward, is going to be adapting to what those expectations are and what becomes the expected interfaces across the board.
No, that's really well thought out answer. And look, I just to comment, I would agree in the AI space, but I think it's really interesting now because of easy press and the not ease of able to make some of these tools and softwares, but I think companies are very quick to just go first to market without really putting anything out that is extremely quality. If I'm being totally on, if I'm being transparent, a lot of people are like, oh, no one's really thought of putting, AI voice generated stuff or AI, moving images. And everyone's just like, we can be the first one. And frankly, not all of it impresses me. And even stuff that is as simple as, not simple, but copywriting, editing, and different stuff like that is extremely useful, still has bugs and still needs to be fixed. And I worry that rush to market is just going to create a surge of an industry that is entirely too bloated and competitive right out the gate. Now, probably know better than me that the strongest will survive. It's pretty dog eat dog out there. But I'm just worried what your thoughts on
Yeah.
that are.
I mean, I sort of like I equated back and I said, when I've seen major shifts, like one of the major shifts I really saw was the push towards like SaaS-based products.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And at that point, it was just this massive arms race of, well, there's nobody that's got a SaaS that, I don't know, walks your dog or something. Let's build one. But actually, they rushed it to market and they couldn't walk a dog with something, right? And that I think I've seen this before. It is always just the, hey, it's an arms race. We're going to get something out there. Some will survive and some won't. I think AI has opened a lot of doors, probably more than what would have been existing previously in like the SaaS races, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And we are seeing products that shouldn't go to market, that are too early. I think there's a lot of excitement around it because it's new, it's different. A lot of people can't believe what it can do.
I
How
think it's kind of
quickly
novel and can
it's
be cheap
novel, right?
tricks every now and then.
So like we're getting a lot of that, and we've also got the value aspects behind it. I mean, like
Sure.
Chat GPT just blew the doors off everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody else was ready for them to drop their product as wide as they did, and all of a sudden it's AI everything.
Yeah.
And you look at somebody like Midjourney. I mean, their image creation stuff is amazing, like really, really powerful. But then there's a whole bunch of other ones that aren't particularly as even remotely in the same space. So I think there's always going to be that shuffle up. My biggest concerns don't come down to a bloated ecosystem. The strong will survive, and that's the way it's going to be. That's the way of the world, right? But the bit which worries me more so is the sort of data security. You briefly touched on, stuff being wrong or the hallucinations within things. I mean, we see it within code editing when we're testing something with AI, and it'll recommend a library that just doesn't exist. It should exist, but it doesn't exist. And I think we've got a couple of different sides to that, which worry me more from a sort of my personal context, is the security of what's going in there. Where is it getting stored? Is it getting indexed? Are you handing out company IP secrets that could be used nefariously, or are we pushing into something else? And then in the long run is additional security as what is being written. Is there any ethics built into AI? And I personally was looking at the sort of ecosystem or the engineering space or the product space, and I kind of view the two biggest growth areas probably going forward is going to be security and AI, and then probably the ethics of AI into business and into integration, because I think they're both very, very hot topics that are going to only start to show their true impact as it impacts the general population as a whole. The rest of it is just an arms race to get great tools out there, and that's just capitalism 101.
No, and I think that's an inspired answer. I mean, the early days of the internet was essentially the wild, wild west before they accounted for security and ethics. So I think the best way to predict the future is to look at the past, and I think you're pretty spot on there. I think that's well said, Leigh. The final question I have for you is the same final question I give to all my guests, and that essentially boils down to the fact that e-commerce professionals and entrepreneurs are operating 24/7, 365, constantly on call, which can exacerbate some, mental faculties, honestly. And essentially, what sort of hobbies and interests do you do in your free time to establish a good mental health and a work-life harmony that is less stress-induced?
It's an area which I think about massively, and something I'm pretty passionate about, having come off the back of many years of trying to figure out why I was roughly depressed, etc., etc. So yeah, I have lots of hobbies. I am ADHD to the max. I have been my entire life unmedicated, so I generally will learn something, hyper focus on it, get really into it, and I have lots of them, and I rotate through them. So that's how I sort of get into it. So
good for you.
Whether that's playing guitar or music production, fly fishing, I tend to try and hit a river whenever I'm feeling that point where I'm like, I just need the time now. It's been exacerbating, and I need to unswitch or like just literally unplug. I'll hit a river, and you'll find me in waders somewhere
That's very
very, very
cool.
far away from people. Um, and then other things that are along the same mindset of hiking. I try to get a hiking a couple of times a month and just explore somewhere that I haven't been, and use that time to unpack the complete clutter of that life, which I think is one of the biggest like mental health drains, is that there's just so much going on and your mind's thinking about so much all the time, continually.
And it doesn't stop. Yeah.
And it doesn't stop. And sometimes you need to get to that point where there is a bit of quiet space.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, hiking works for that. And in terms of my day-to-day sort of general hobbies and health, I took up running a couple of months ago, which
Look at
has
you.
which I had never ever thought I would run from anything but like a bear or a lion or whatever. And that's kind of become my go-to, whether it's a 5K or a 10K after work. Of just, okay, my day's done. All of the chaos is there. Yes, there's stuff that still needs to be handled, but I will
Mm-hmm.
make sure that I find that time and find that space every day, to just try and recenter down and try and bring priority to the chaos. Because I think that's the first stage, is just finding that priority of what do you actually have to do. Do that. And then
Mm-hmm.
the rest will fall in line as they need to.
And
So
it's easier
that's
to
my
do
sort
that
of
the
approach.
quieter it gets. Definitely.
The quieter it gets, and so I think it is that it's finding that space, throwing your headphones on, and just getting lost in a little bit, and then aligning everything down to, hey, this is what I actually need to focus on and get going.
That's beautiful, man. Well, Leigh, I really appreciate the thoughtful conversation, and thank you for coming on the show, man.
Yeah, man, it's been awesome. Thank you for having me.